Kemi was a young woman full of life and dreams. She lived in a small, quiet village where everyone knew each other. Life seemed simple, but in this village, traditions were strict and mistakes were rarely forgiven. At just 19, Kemi found out she was pregnant. The father of her unborn child, a young man she loved deeply, abandoned her as soon as she shared the news. Instead of support, her parents were furious. "You have brought shame to this family," her father said. Her mother, though sad, stood silently by her husband's decision. Within days, Kemi was disowned. The villagers gossiped endlessly, calling her names and treating her like an outcast. "Who will marry a girl like that?" they whispered behind her back. Feeling broken but determined, Kemi decided to leave the village. She packed a small bag, carrying only a few clothes and the little money she had saved. With nowhere else to go, she traveled to a small town several miles away. In this new town, life was harsh. Kemi struggled to find work, and being pregnant only made it harder. People were reluctant to hire her. "We need someone strong," they would say, shaking their heads. But Kemi refused to give up. She started doing odd jobs, washing clothes, cleaning homes, and selling fruits in the market. Even with her growing belly, she worked tirelessly. Months later, Kemi gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. She named him Henry, promising herself that she would give him a better life, no matter what it took. Holding him in her arms, she felt a new kind of strength. Henry became her world. As time went on, Kemi caught the attention of a few men. She was beautiful, hardworking, and kind. But each time a man showed interest, they pulled away when they learned about Henry. "I can't compete with your son for your attention," one of them told her. Another man, though kind at first, quickly lost interest, saying, "You will never love me fully." It hurt Kemi deeply. She wanted to love again, to have a partner to share her struggles with, but no one seemed willing to accept her and her child. She began to believe that maybe she was meant to walk this journey alone. Despite the heartbreak, Kemi kept moving forward. She worked harder than ever, saving every naira she could. Slowly, she started a small business selling fabrics, and though it wasn't much, it was enough to feed and clothe Henry. At night, when Henry was asleep, Kemi would look at him and smile through her tears. "I'll do everything for you," she whispered to him. "You'll grow up strong and successful, my son." Kemi's days were often busy with work and caring for her son, Henry. At 10 years old, Henry was a bright and curious boy. He loved school and always came home eager to tell his mother about his day. Their small house was often filled with his laughter, and Kemi felt a deep sense of pride watching her son grow. One sunny afternoon, as Kemi prepared a simple lunch, Henry returned from school with a thoughtful look on his face. He hesitated for a moment before sitting down at the small wooden table. "Mama," he began, his voice soft. "Yes, my dear. How was school today?" Kemi replied, her back turned as she stirred the pot on the stove. "Mama, do I have a father?" Kemi froze. She felt the wooden spoon in her hand tremble slightly. In all these years, Henry had never asked about his father. She had hoped he might never ask, but here it was, the question she had dreaded. She turned slowly to face him. Henry's big, curious eyes looked up at her, filled with innocence and longing. She pulled a chair and sat beside him, placing a hand gently on his. "You do have a father, Henry," she began, "but he isn't with us. He left a long time ago, even before you were born." "Why did he leave us?" Henry asked. Kemi took a deep breath, her heart aching at the memory. "When I found out I was going to have you, I told your father. His name is Femi. At first I thought he would be happy, but he wasn't. He said he wasn't ready to be a father and wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. I begged him, Henry. I begged him to stay, but he walked away." Henry's face was solemn, and Kemi felt a pang of guilt, but she knew he deserved the truth. "After that, my parents disowned me, and I had to leave the village. I haven't seen Femi since, and I don't know where he is or what he's doing now." Henry was quiet for a moment, processing her words. Then he reached out and hugged her tightly. "It's okay, Mama. You're the best parent I could ever have." Kemi held him close, tears welling up in her eyes. She silently vowed to be enough for him, to give him everything she could so he wouldn't feel the absence of his father. The following day, Kemi took Henry to the market to buy a few household items. The bustling market was noisy as usual, filled with the sounds of traders shouting and people bargaining for goods. Henry held on to Kemi's hand as they moved through the crowd. As they walked past a fabric stall, Kemi suddenly stopped in her tracks. There, standing just a few feet away, was Femi. He looked older but still recognizable, tall, with a confident stance and a bright smile. He was chatting with someone, seemingly oblivious to Kemi's presence. Kemi's heart raced. She tightened her grip on Henry's hand and stepped closer. "Femi!" she called out. Femi turned, and for a moment his expression froze. He looked at Kemi, then at Henry, and back at her. "It's been a long time," Kemi said, her voice trembling. "This is Henry. He's your son." Femi's face hardened. He stepped back slightly, glancing around as if worried someone might see them. "Kemi," he said firmly, keeping his voice low. "I'm married now. I have a family. Please don't bring up the past. I'm happy where I am." Kemi felt her heart shatter. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "But Femi," she pleaded, "Henry deserves to know his father. He's a good boy, and he needs you in his life." "I'm sorry," Femi said, avoiding her gaze. "This isn't my responsibility anymore. Please, Kemi, just stay away from me." Without another word, Femi turned and walked away, leaving Kemi standing in the middle of the market, stunned and heartbroken. That night, Kemi sat beside Henry as he lay in bed. She stroked his hair gently, her thoughts swirling with pain and anger. "I'm sorry, my son," she whispered. "Your father doesn't want to be part of our lives, but you don't need him. I will be both your mother and your father." Henry looked up at her with determined eyes. "Mama, I don't need him. I promise I'll never ask about him again. I will make you proud, Mama. I'll always be here for you." Tears streamed down Kemi's face as she hugged her son tightly. That night, both mother and son made silent promises to each other, to always stand by one another no matter what. Years passed, and Kemi's sacrifices bore fruit. She raised Henry to be a hard-working and respectful young man. Despite the challenges she faced as a single mother, she gave him the best education she could afford and taught him the values of humility, kindness, and determination. Henry, in turn, did not disappoint her. He excelled in school and later graduated with honors, quickly rising in the business world. His intelligence and work ethic helped him build a thriving tech company, making him one of the most successful young men in the city. Now wealthy and undeniably handsome, Henry attracted attention wherever he went. Women were drawn to his confidence and charm, but Kemi noticed something that troubled her. Many of these women seemed more interested in his wealth than in who he was as a person. At social events, they would surround him, laughing at his jokes and competing for his attention. Kemi saw through their shallow compliments and eager smiles. They didn't know the Henry she had raised, the boy who had grown up with nothing but a dream and a strong will. One day, as Henry visited Kemi at home, he shared some news that startled her. "Mama, there's someone I've been seeing," he said casually, sitting across from her at the small dining table. Kemi looked up from the fabric she was folding. "Someone? A woman?" Henry nodded with a smile. "Her name is Jane. We've been together for a while now. She's amazing, Mama. Beautiful, confident, and sophisticated. I think she's the one." Kemi's heart sank a little, but she forced herself to smile. "You've never mentioned her before. Why haven't you brought her to meet me?" Henry hesitated. "She's been busy with work. She's a fashion designer and her schedule is packed, but I promise you'll meet her soon." Kemi nodded, though unease crept into her heart. She didn't want to judge a woman she hadn't met, but she couldn't ignore the pattern she had seen in so many others. Later that week, Henry made a decision. He invited Jane over to his house for a private dinner, planning to propose. Jane, as always, looked stunning. Her flawless makeup and elegant dress complemented her striking features. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who was used to being admired. During dinner, Henry reached for her hand and looked into her eyes. "Jane," he began, "these past few months have been the best of my life. You've brought joy and excitement into my world, and I can't imagine my future without you." Jane's smile widened as Henry pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" he asked. Jane gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Henry, yes. Of course I will." As they embraced, Henry felt a wave of happiness, but somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered his mother's words, "Are you sure they care for you and not just your money?" Henry decided to tell Kemi the next day, eager to share the good news. "Mama," he said, grinning, "Jane and I are engaged." Kemi's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "That's wonderful, my son. When will I meet her?" "Very soon, Mama," Henry replied. But Kemi couldn't shake her unease. She had seen too many women try to charm her son, and something about Jane's description, beautiful, sophisticated, and confident, set off a quiet alarm in her heart. Kemi lived a simple life despite her son's growing wealth. She preferred staying in her modest home, surrounded by familiar neighbors, rather than moving into Henry's luxurious mansion. She enjoyed her independence and felt a deep connection to the small community that had supported her. One evening, Kemi made her way home from the local market with a bag of fruits and vegetables. The streets were quieter than usual, and she quickened her pace, clutching her bag tightly. Out of nowhere, 3 men emerged from a dark alley. Their faces were partially hidden, and their movements were intimidating. "Madame, drop the bag," one of them barked, stepping closer. Kemi froze. "Please, I have nothing of value," she stammered, trying to back away. But the men didn't listen. One of them grabbed her arm roughly, making her cry out. "Let her go," a voice rang out from behind them. The thugs turned to see a young woman standing a few feet away. She was petite but carried herself with surprising confidence. "This is none of your business," one of the men growled. The young woman didn't budge. "You heard me. Let her go, or I'll call the police," she said, holding up her phone. The men hesitated for a moment before deciding it wasn't worth the trouble. They released Kemi and disappeared into the shadows. Kemi, still trembling, turned to the young woman. "Thank you, my dear. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in." "It's nothing, Ma," the woman replied with a warm smile. "Are you okay? Do you live nearby?" Kemi nodded. "Yes, I live just a few streets away. My name is Kemi." "I'm Emily," the woman said. "Let me walk you home, just to be safe." Kemi was struck by Emily's kindness and humility. She didn't just help her, she stayed by her side until they reached her house. After thanking Emily profusely, Kemi couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was this young woman who had risked herself to help a stranger? The next day, Kemi casually mentioned the encounter to her neighbor, who often knew everyone in the area. "That's Emily," the neighbor said. "She's a secretary at some big company, a very sweet girl, always helping people around here." Kemi's curiosity deepened. She decided to do some discreet investigating. Asking a few more questions, she discovered that Emily worked as a secretary in none other than Henry's company. The revelation surprised her. Could it be fate? The more she learned about Emily, the more impressed she became. Emily came from a humble family and had worked hard to get where she was. Despite her struggles, she was known for her kindness and generosity. Kemi sat in her small living room that evening, reflecting on the encounter. "She didn't know who I was," Kemi thought to herself. "She helped me without expecting anything in return. That's rare." She made a mental note to observe Emily further. There was something about her that gave Kemi hope. Hope that perhaps not everyone in Henry's life was motivated by money or appearances. Emily arrived at work early every morning, ready to tackle the day's challenges with her usual quiet determination. As Henry's secretary, she handled his demanding schedule with ease and ensured the office ran smoothly. She was efficient, respectful, and always professional. To Henry, Emily was indispensable, a key part of his company's success. He admired her dedication and work ethic, but never saw her as more than an excellent employee. What Henry didn't know was that Emily had secretly admired him for years. She was drawn to his intelligence, charm, and the kindness he showed to those around him. But she kept her feelings buried, convinced that someone like him, wealthy, successful, and surrounded by glamorous women, would never notice someone like her. "He's out of my league," Emily often told herself, pushing aside the pangs of longing that surfaced whenever Henry smiled at her or thanked her for a job well done. Meanwhile, Kemi couldn't stop thinking about Emily. She wanted Henry to see what she saw in the young woman: humility, strength, and a kind heart. One evening she brought up Emily during their usual dinner conversation. "Henry," she began as they sat in the dining room of his luxurious home, "there's something I want to tell you." "What is it, Mama?" Henry asked, looking up from his plate. Kemi hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Do you remember the other day when I told you I was attacked by some thugs near the market?" Henry's expression darkened. "Yes. I still can't believe something like that happened. Are you sure you're okay now?" "I'm fine," Kemi assured him. "But what I didn't tell you is that a young woman saved me that day. Her name is Emily Olorenfemi, and she works at your company as your secretary." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Emily? She saved you?" Kemi nodded, a smile forming on her lips. "She didn't know who I was, but she stepped in without hesitation. She was brave, kind, and didn't expect anything in return. It made me think, I wish Jane had a heart like hers." Henry leaned back in his chair, considering his mother's words. "Emily is a good person," he admitted. "She's hard-working and humble. I rely on her a lot at the office, but what?" Kemi pressed. Henry shrugged. "I know what you are driving at, Mama, but I've never thought about her in that way. She's simple. I mean, I respect her, but I'm usually more attracted to women who are sophisticated, like Jane." Kemi's smile faltered slightly, but she didn't let her disappointment show. "Sophistication is nice, Henry," she said gently, "but it's not what makes a good wife. A selfless heart, loyalty, and kindness. That's what truly matters." "I know, Mama," Henry replied, "and I promise I'll keep that in mind. But Jane is nice too, and I'm sure you will like her after you meet her." Kemi nodded, though her unease lingered. She didn't want to interfere in Henry's decisions, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Jane wasn't the right woman for him. As the evening went on, Kemi couldn't help but wonder how she could make Henry see beyond appearances and appreciate the things that truly mattered in a partner. Kemi could no longer keep her concerns about Jane to herself. After her conversations with Henry, she grew even more uneasy about his engagement. She needed to know if Jane truly loved Henry for who he was, or if she was simply drawn to his wealth and status. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Kemi shared her plan. "Henry," she began, "I need to know if Jane is the right woman for you. I can't shake the feeling that something is off. Will you let me test her?" "Test her?" Henry asked, frowning. "Yes," Kemi said firmly. "I'll move into your mansion, but not as your mother. I'll be your maid, and we'll see how Jane treats me when she thinks I'm powerless. How a person treats those they think are beneath them reveals their true character." Henry sighed, shaking his head. "Mama, do you really think this is necessary? Jane is busy planning our wedding. She's not going to focus on the staff." Kemi's gaze was steady. "Henry, if you truly want me to support this marriage, you'll let me do this. If she passes the test, I'll welcome her with open arms." After a moment of hesitation, Henry relented. "Fine, Mama. I'll go along with it, but I'm only doing this for your peace of mind." A few days later, Kemi packed a small bag and moved into Henry's mansion. She dressed in plain clothes, wrapped a scarf around her head, and kept her demeanor humble. The house staff, who were loyal to Kemi, were told to address her as Iyabo, the new maid. That evening, Henry invited Jane to move in with him temporarily, claiming it would help them finalize their wedding plans. Jane arrived in her usual stunning style, wearing a designer dress and carrying expensive luggage. Henry introduced Kemi as the new maid. "This is Iyabo," he said curtly. "She'll take care of things around the house." Jane barely glanced at Kemi, offering only a dismissive nod before turning her attention back to Henry. The next morning, Kemi began her duties as a maid, cleaning, cooking, and serving meals. She noticed that Jane didn't acknowledge her unless she needed something. Even then, her tone was sharp and condescending. "Iyabo, bring me some water," Jane called out from the couch one afternoon. When Kemi quickly complied, Jane didn't even look up from her phone. Kemi tried to engage Jane in small talk during her chores, but Jane only responded with brief, uninterested answers. One evening, Henry decided to escalate the test. As Kemi served dinner, he deliberately raised his voice, shouting at her for no reason. "Iyabo, why is this food cold?" he barked, slamming his fork on the table. Kemi bowed her head, playing her role perfectly. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll warm it up right away." Jane watched silently, her expression unreadable. She didn't say a word in Kemi's defense, nor did she question Henry's behavior. After Kemi left the dining room, Henry turned to Jane. "Do you think I was too harsh on her?" Jane shrugged. "She's just a maid, Henry. If she made a mistake, she should fix it. You shouldn't feel bad about holding her accountable." Henry's stomach twisted at her words. He had hoped Jane would speak up or show some compassion, but instead, she dismissed Kemi as if she didn't matter. Later that night, Kemi sat in her small room reflecting on the day's events. Her heart felt heavy, but she wasn't surprised by Jane's behavior. When Henry came to check on her, she looked up at him with sad eyes. "You see what I mean now?" Henry nodded slowly, the weight of the situation settling over him. "I didn't think she would act that way. I expected her to at least say something when I shouted at you." "This is why I wanted to test her," Kemi said. "Marriage isn't just about love, Henry. It's about character, kindness, and how someone treats the people around them. If Jane can't show compassion to someone she thinks is a maid, how will she treat your family, your future children?" Henry didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing for sure. Kemi's concerns were valid. Days turned into weeks, and Kemi's role as the maid in Henry's mansion gave her a front-row seat to Jane's true nature. Jane's dismissive and rude behavior became more apparent whenever Henry wasn't around. "Old woman, can't you move faster?" Jane snapped one afternoon as Kemi carefully dusted the furniture. "You're so slow, it's like watching a snail." Kemi swallowed her pride and kept quiet, knowing this was part of the test. But the insults kept coming. One morning, Jane called Kemi into the kitchen. A glass of water sat on the counter. "Iyabo," Jane said, her tone icy. "You forgot to clean this glass yesterday." Before Kemi could respond, Jane grabbed the glass and poured its contents over Kemi's hands. "You're so old and lazy, I don't even know why Henry keeps you here. Do your job properly next time." Kemi's heart ached at the humiliation, but she didn't let her emotions show. Instead, she looked at Jane and said softly, "I could be your mother. You know I'm not so young anymore, just be a little more patient with me." Jane sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "My mother could never be a poor, disgusting maid like you, so stop acting like you're anything important and do your job." Later that day, Henry had forgotten an important file at home. Emily, ever reliable, stopped by the house to retrieve it. She knocked on the door and was surprised when Kemi answered. "It's you," Emily exclaimed, recognizing the elderly woman she had helped in the market. "I didn't know you worked here." Kemi smiled warmly, her spirits lifting at Emily's kind tone. "Yes, my dear. I'm just helping around." Emily stepped inside, but before she could say much, Jane's voice echoed from the living room. "Iyabo, what are you doing standing there? Get back to work." Emily turned toward the voice and saw Jane lounging on the couch, her perfectly manicured fingers scrolling through her phone. "I'm so sorry," Kemi murmured to Emily, hurrying to the living room with a tray of tea. Emily followed quietly, watching in disbelief as Jane began berating Kemi for being slow and incompetent. "You're pathetic," Jane spat. "Henry should just fire you. I don't know why he bothers keeping someone so useless around." Emily couldn't stay silent any longer. "Excuse me, Miss Jane," she said, her voice firm but polite. "But don't you think you're being a bit harsh? She hasn't even done anything." Jane looked up, startled. "And who are you to tell me how to talk to my staff? I'm someone who believes in treating people with respect no matter their position," Emily replied, standing her ground. Jane rolled her eyes. "You don't understand how things work here. This woman is paid to do her job, and if she can't handle criticism, she should leave." Emily turned to Kemi, her expression filled with concern. "Ma, if you ever want to leave this place, you're welcome to come and stay with me. No one deserves to be treated like this." Kemi felt tears sting her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, nodding at Emily's kindness. Jane scoffed. "Mind your own business, little Miss Secretary, you're overstepping your boundaries." Emily held her ground. "Kindness is never out of bounds, Miss Jane. Maybe you should try it sometime." Jane snapped. "If you're done playing hero, you can leave now. I have better things to do than argue with someone like you." Emily retrieved the file she came for and gave Kemi a parting look. "If you ever need help, please don't hesitate to reach out. she said softly before leaving. Kemi watched Emily go, her heart warmed by the younger woman's kindness and courage. The stark difference between Emily's treatment of her and Jane's cruelty was impossible to ignore. Later that evening, as Kemi sat in her small room, she reflected on the day's events. Jane's behavior had revealed the harsh truth she had suspected all along. Jane lacked the compassion and respect that Kemi believed was essential in a partner for her son. Emily, on the other hand, had proven once again that her kindness wasn't just a passing gesture. It was a fundamental part of who she was. It was a quiet afternoon in the mansion. Kemi, still disguised as Iyabo, had been sent to the market by Jane to buy groceries. Kemi didn't mind the task. It gave her time to think about how she would approach Henry about everything she had observed. She realized she had forgotten her scarf at home and decided to rush back to retrieve it. Just then, Kemi entered the house quietly. She heard Jane talking on the phone in the living room. The tone of her voice was sharp and agitated. Curious, Kemi paused, staying out of sight behind the partially open door. "I can't believe this," Jane was saying angrily. "I'm pregnant, and I cannot tell Henry because we've never been intimate. It's all because of that ridiculous advice from his mother. Wait till marriage, he says." Ah! Kemi's blood ran cold as she listened. Jane was pregnant? That didn't make sense. Henry had told her he was waiting for marriage. Wow, that means Jane has been seeing another man. "I can't lose Henry," Jane continued, her frustration clear. "He's my golden ticket. If I lose him, I lose everything." There was a pause as her friend on the other end spoke, and then Jane replied, her voice quieter but laced with desperation. "What do you mean, put something in his drink? Are you serious?" Kemi's heart began to race. She leaned closer, her breathing shallow as she tried to hear every word. "Look," Jane's friend said, her voice faintly audible through the phone. "If you don't act fast, you might lose him for good. Slip something in his drink, get him in the mood, and make it happen. If he finds out you're pregnant later, he'll have no choice but to marry you." Kemi couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and began recording the conversation. "I don't know," Jane said, pacing the room. "What if it doesn't work? What if he doesn't, go along with it?" Her friend laughed coldly. "Then you'll have to take more drastic measures. If you want that lifestyle, Jane, you have to fight for it. Do whatever it takes." Kemi's stomach churned as she captured the exchange on video. She couldn't believe the lengths Jane was willing to go to trap her son with another man's child. Jane finally stopped pacing and let out a heavy sigh. "Fine, I'll do it tonight. He'll be home late and I'll make sure it happens. He'll never know what hit him." Kemi stepped back silently, her mind racing. She had seen enough. She slipped out of the house without Jane noticing and headed to the market, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and fear. When Kemi returned to the mansion, she locked herself in her small room and replayed the video. The evidence was undeniable. Jane's cruelty and deceit went far deeper than she had ever imagined. She sat on the edge of her bed, her thoughts spinning. "What kind of woman is this?" she whispered to herself. "How can she be planning something so vile against my son?" It was late in the evening when Henry returned home after a long day at work. He looked tired as he walked into the living room, loosening his tie. Jane greeted him with her usual charm, planting a quick kiss on his cheek. "You look exhausted," Jane said sweetly. "Let me get you something to drink. It'll help you relax." Henry nodded absent-mindedly, sinking into the couch. In the kitchen, Jane moved quickly. She reached into her handbag, pulling out a small vial of powder. She glanced around to ensure no one was watching before sprinkling the substance into a glass of juice. A sinister smile played on her lips as she stirred it and carried it back to Henry. Meanwhile, Kemi, who had been monitoring Jane's every move, was prepared. She emerged from the shadows of the hallway, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "Henry!" Kemi called out just as he reached for the glass. "Wait!" Henry looked up, surprised. "Yabo, what's wrong?" "You can't drink that," Kemi said firmly, stepping into the room. Jane's face twisted with irritation. "What are you doing, Iyabo? This is none of your business." "It is my business," Kemi shot back, at her voice steady, "because I know what you put in that glass." Henry's brows furrowed. "What is she talking about, Jane?" Jane laughed nervously, waving a hand dismissively. This old woman is crazy. Henry, you need to get rid of her. She's been nothing but trouble since the day she got here. But Kemi wasn't backing down. Henry, I've tolerated enough insults for the sake of the test, but I can't stay silent any longer. I know exactly who Jane is and what she's been plotting. Henry! Jane interrupted, her voice shrill. Kick her out of this house right now. She's accusing me of nonsense. Henry held up a hand, silencing her. Iyabo, he said, his tone cautious. What are you talking about? Kemi straightened, her gaze unwavering. Henry, it's time she knows the truth. The room fell silent. Jane's jaw dropped and her face turned pale. What truth? She exclaimed, her voice shaking. Henry stared at Kemi, stunned. Jane, this is Madam Kemi, my mother, and this was all a test. Yes, Kemi admitted. I needed to know the kind of person you truly are. And now, I have proof. She pulled out her phone and played the video she had recorded earlier. The room filled with Jane's voice, as she told her friend about her pregnancy, her plan to drug Henry, and her desperation to secure his wealth. Henry's face darkened as the video played. Jane stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Henry, she stammered, it's not what it looks like. I was just joking with my friend. You know how women talk sometimes. Henry's voice was cold as ice. Joking? You call drugging me and stealing my wealth a joke? Jane moved closer to him, and tears filled her eyes. Please, Henry, I love you. I only did this because I was scared of losing you. Kemi stepped forward, her voice firm. Love doesn't involve manipulation and lies, Jane. You've shown your true colors, and they're nothing but greed and selfishness. Henry looked at Jane, his disappointment clear. I trusted you. I thought you loved me for who I am, not for what I have. But now I see I was wrong. Jane fell to her knees, sobbing. Please, Henry, don't do this. I can change. I'll be better. But Henry shook his head. It's too late, Jane. Pack your things and leave. Moments later, Jane was escorted out of the house by security, her tears doing nothing to sway Henry. Kemi stood by her son's side, her heart heavy but relieved that the truth had come to light. As the door slammed shut behind Jane, Henry turned to Kemi. Mama, he said quietly, I can't believe what you've done for me. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in. Kemi smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. I only want what's best for you, my son. You deserve someone who will love you for who you are, not for what you can give them. Henry nodded, his respect for his mother growing even deeper. The weeks following Jane's betrayal were difficult for Henry. The sting of her deceit left him questioning his judgment and his ability to trust others. Kemi stayed close by, offering her support and reminding him that not everyone in his life had bad intentions. Mama, Henry said one evening as they sat in the garden, how do I know someone loves me for who I am and not for what I have? Jane said all the right things, but look how that ended. Kemi smiled gently, her hands resting on his. Henry, trust takes time, and not everyone is like Jane. Sometimes the right person is already in your life, you just need to see them for who they are. Henry thought about her words, and one name came to mind. Emily. He remembered her quiet kindness, her humility, and how she had always treated everyone with respect. Emily, he murmured. Yes, Kemi said, her eyes lighting up. I see the way she carries herself, with grace and sincerity. I've seen it since the day she saved me in the market. You should give her a chance. Henry hesitated. But what if I'm wrong again? What if she's just better at hiding it? Kemi shook her head. If you really want to know someone's intentions, test them the right way. See how they react when the wealth and luxury are gone. That night, Henry made up his mind. He wanted to pursue a relationship with Emily but needed to be certain of her motives. The next day, he approached Emily at her desk. Emily, he began, his voice calm but serious. I've been thinking a lot about us. I'd like to spend more time with you, outside of work. Would you be willing to go out with me? Emily looked up surprised. Her cheeks flushed and she smiled shyly. Of course, Henry. I mean, Mr. Henry, I'd love to. Call me Henry, he said with a smile. Their relationship began slowly. Emily's warmth and sincerity helped Henry heal from the pain Jane had caused. She never asked for expensive gifts or extravagant dates, and her humility only deepened his admiration for her. But a lingering doubt still gnawed at Henry. Was Emily truly different, or was she simply waiting for the right moment? One evening he discussed his concerns with Kemi. "Mama, I want to trust her, but I need to know for sure." Kemi, ever supportive, encouraged him. "If you need proof, then test her. But remember, Emily has shown nothing but kindness, even when she didn't know who we were. Keep that in mind." The following week, Henry set his plan in motion. He spread rumors among his employees and close associates that his company had collapsed. He sent out an official email stating that due to bad investments, the business had gone bankrupt, and that all staff, including Emily, were being relieved of their duties. He even claimed that his private savings had been drained trying to keep the company afloat. "I've lost everything," he told them. When Henry broke the news to Emily personally and told her he had to move to a smaller apartment as the bank had seized his mansion, her reaction was a mixture of concern and sadness. "I'm so sorry, Henry," she said softly. "This must be so hard for you." "It is," he replied, his voice heavy with feigned despair. "I don't know how I'll manage now. I don't even have a job for you anymore." Emily reached out and touched his hand. "Don't worry about me. I'll find another job. But if you need help, please let me know. I'm here for you." In the days that followed, Henry watched closely as Emily adjusted to the news. She didn't distance herself from him, nor did she complain about losing her job. Instead, she focused on supporting him, bringing him homemade meals, and offering words of encouragement. One evening, she showed up at his small apartment with a bag of groceries. "Emily," Henry said, surprised. "What's this?" "I thought you might need a little help," she said with a smile. "I know things are tough right now, but you'll get through this." Henry's heart swelled with emotion. Despite thinking he had lost everything, Emily's actions were driven by care and loyalty. Later that evening, Henry went and told his mother everything. "I told you she was different," she said to Henry with a big smile. Henry nodded, his doubts beginning to fade. "She's amazing, Mama. I've never met anyone like her." As Henry's carefully crafted rumor of bankruptcy spread, he watched how the people in his life reacted to his supposed downfall. To his dismay, most of his associates distanced themselves almost immediately. The calls and invitations that had once flooded his days came to an abrupt halt. The most painful betrayal came from his closest friend, James. James had been by Henry's side since his business began, always claiming to have Henry's best interests at heart. But as soon as the news of Henry's financial ruin broke, James stopped answering his calls. One evening, Henry finally managed to reach James. "James, I need your advice," Henry said, feigning desperation. "Things are falling apart, and I don't know where to start rebuilding." James hesitated on the other end of the line. "Henry, I'm sorry, but I don't think I can help. I've got my own issues to deal with right now. Maybe it's best if we keep some distance for a while." The call ended abruptly, leaving Henry staring at his phone in disbelief. Days turned into weeks, and Henry felt the isolation creeping in. But amidst the loneliness, there was one person who hadn't abandoned him: Emily. Emily continued to visit Henry regularly, bringing him meals and words of encouragement. She even suggested ways he could rebuild his business, offering practical ideas. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Henry turned to Emily, his voice heavy with emotion. "Emily, why are you still here? Everyone else has left. Even James, someone I considered a brother, has turned his back on me. Why haven't you? You know I have nothing to offer." Emily hesitated, her cheeks flushing. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him, her eyes filled with sincerity. "Henry," she began softly, "I've loved you since the first day I saw you. Not because of your wealth or your success, but because of who you are. The way you treat people, your kindness, your determination. It inspired me from the very start." Henry was taken aback. "You loved me all this time?" Emily nodded. "I never said anything because I thought I wasn't good enough for you. You're surrounded by beautiful, accomplished women. What could someone like me offer you?" Henry reached out and took her hand, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've already given me more than I could ask for, Emily. Your kindness and loyalty mean everything to me. While others ran away, you stayed." Tears filled Emily's eyes, and she smiled shyly. "I'll always stay, Henry. I don't care about the money or the status. I care about you." With that, Henry pulled her close, and they shared a passionate kiss. Henry couldn't keep the truth from Emily any longer. Her loyalty and unwavering support had proven her love beyond any doubt, and it was time to come clean. That evening, as they sat together in the living room, he looked at her with a seriousness that made her heart skip a beat. "Emily," he began, his voice low and steady, "there's something I need to tell you. I haven't been completely honest with you." Emily frowned slightly, concern flickering in her eyes. "What is it, Henry? Is something wrong?" He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "The rumors about my company's collapse, about me losing everything, they aren't true. I faked it." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "What? Why would you do that?" Henry took her hands in his gaze filled with regret. "After what happened with Jane, I couldn't trust anyone. I needed to know if you loved me for who I am or if you were like the others, only here for my wealth." Emily pulled her hands away, standing up as she processed his words. Hurt flashed across her face. "You tested me. You lied to me about everything just to see how I'd react." "Yes," Henry admitted, and standing as well. "And I'm so sorry, Emily. It wasn't fair to you, and I hate that I doubted you. But through it all, you stayed by my side. You proved to me that your love is real." Emily turned away, her arms crossed as tears filled her eyes. She had been so vulnerable, pouring her heart out to him, and now she felt exposed. After a moment, she turned back to him. "I understand your fears, Henry," she said softly. "You've been hurt before, and you needed to protect yourself. But it still hurts to know that you didn't trust me." Henry stepped closer, his voice filled with emotion. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. You've shown me what real love looks like, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me." Emily looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity there. Slowly she nodded. "I forgive you, Henry. But don't ever test me like that again." "Never," Henry promised, pulling her into a tight embrace. Later that evening, Henry led Emily to the kitchen where Kemi was waiting with a warm smile. "Mama," Henry began, "I'd like you to officially meet Emily. Emily, this is my mother, Kemi." Emily's jaw dropped in surprise. "You're his mother? But I thought you were Iyabo." Kemi laughed, stepping forward to take Emily's hands. "Yes, I was Iyabo, but it was all part of the plan to test Jane, and in the process, I got to know you, a kind, humble, and selfless woman who saved me without even knowing who I was." Emily blushed, still processing the revelation. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," Kemi said warmly. "You're exactly the kind of person I've prayed for Henry to find. What are you waiting for, my son?" Henry smiled, reaching into his pocket. "You're right, Mama. There's no point in waiting any longer." He turned to Emily, his heart pounding with emotion, and got down on one knee. Emily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "Emily," Henry said, holding out a beautiful ring, "you've shown me the meaning of true love. You've been my light in the darkest times. Will you do me the honor of being my wife?" Tears streamed down Emily's face as she nodded. "Yes, Henry, yes." Henry slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced as Kemi clapped her hands joyfully. "This is the happiest day of my life," Kemi said. As the three of them stood together, they knew they were starting not just a new chapter, but a beautiful story built on love, trust, and family. The weeks following Henry's proposal were filled with joy and excitement. With Emily by his side, Henry returned to his business, more determined than ever to grow his company. The fake rumors of bankruptcy had not only exposed those who were disloyal, but also reaffirmed the importance of genuine relationships. Henry reinstated the staff members who had shown loyalty during the trial, and made a point to personally thank and reward those who stood by him. With his circle of trust now smaller but stronger, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Months later, the day of Henry and Emily's wedding arrived. The ceremony was held in a lush garden, filled with vibrant flowers and the soft melody of a live band. Emily walked down the aisle in a stunning white dress, her radiant smile lighting up the entire venue. Kemi couldn't hold back her tears as she watched Henry, standing at the altar, looking at Emily with nothing but love in his eyes. The journey to this moment had been long and filled with challenges, but it was all worth it. She had raised a fine young man on her own, and she did a great job. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers. Henry and Emily shared their first kiss as a married couple, and Kemi felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. That evening, as the festivities continued, Kemi found a quiet spot in the garden to reflect. She thought about the struggles she had faced, being disowned by her family, raising Henry alone, and fighting against a society that had tried to tear them down. But those hardships had shaped her into the strong woman she was today, and Henry, her greatest pride, had grown into a man of integrity and character. Emily joined her, still glowing from the joy of the day. "Mama," Emily said, sitting beside her, "thank you for everything. You've been my guide and my strength, even before I knew who you really were." Kemi smiled, taking her hand. "No, my dear, thank you. You've shown me that love still exists in its purest form. You've given my son something I always prayed for, a partner who loves him for who he is." Henry walked over to join them, wrapping an arm around his mother and his new bride. "Mama," he said, "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Kemi laughed softly, leaning into her son. "My work is done now, Henry. It's your turn to build a life full of love and happiness." As the night drew to a close, Kemi looked up at the star-filled sky, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. Her son had found true love, and her journey had come full circle. She had fought for Henry, guided him and protected him, and now she could rest easy, knowing he was in good hands.